Hi, my name is Kurt Ackermann, and I'm going to be sharing some of the insights that I've gained over the last 8 years as one of the co-founders of an urban agriculture project in Cape Town, South Africa. I should say that I'm not an academic. I'm part of civil society and more of a project implementer, so this may be a bit of an idiosyncratic approach, but I'll be sharing some of our practical experience and also some pretty pictures because we happen to farm in an incredibly beautiful site, and this is the 2,500 square meter site that is our founding place of work, which is called the Oranjezegt City Farm. It's on the slopes of Table Mountain. It's in a leafy residential suburb near the city center, and it's on an historic site that was formerly a farm dating back to 1709. And our farm takes its name from that farm, which was called Oranjezegt. And this was a site when we acquired it. It had been a trouble spot in our neighborhood, but our neighborhood watch cleaned it up, and a number of us believed that we could use this site to rather create something positive that would attract a more community activity in our neighborhood. And once we got permission, we put out a call for volunteers, and people came out by the dozens and by the hundreds, and we got thousands, tens of thousands of volunteer hours, actually, as people were really hungry for this kind of connection to one another, to their community, to the physical spaces, to nature, and so on. And on that kind of energy, we were able to create quite an amazing farm within a couple of years. And that's what it looks like. It's city center of Cape Town in the background and Table Bay beyond. And our farm is an educational nonprofit project. It's basically a giant outdoor classroom, a space for learning, discovery, connections with nature and one another. We host visiting school groups. We have a wide range of workshops. We have volunteer programs where our farmers teach volunteers about farming and gardening. We have a household kitchen organic waste bokashi recycling program. We have a pick your own harvest where people can come in and we show you how to harvest and how to identify what's ready for harvest. We have allotments that we rent out, and we facilitate the gardening activity among the allotment holders and connections between them. We also started a market about a year after we got going, and that quickly grew and outgrew the space that was available for it. And eventually we wound up at the V&A waterfront on a 3,000 square meter site, which has become hugely popular. We had about 1,500 people per week when we started there, and now it's about 10 to 12,000 people on a weekend. In fact, last year it was named one of the top 20 farmers markets worldwide. And to support that kind of demand, we, of course, got connected to farmers all across Cape Town because our little farm in Oranjezegt wasn't going to supply 10 to 12,000 people. And those connections we made, we celebrated through a conference called Food Dialogues, and we produced a document called the Food Dialogues Report, a snapshot of our local food system and what people had to say and what they thought the priorities were. We also commissioned a journalist to write a book about the first couple of years of our project, which was done. And it essentially was opening and broadening our perspective about what we could do and what needed to be done. And so we stopped thinking of ourselves as one particular farm and started thinking of ourselves as a trust that worked across the city of Cape Town in communities where the need is different and greater in many ways. And what we were bringing to those communities is some key insights from our experience over the previous years. It was really understanding that this kind of food gardening can make a difference in people's lives, regardless of the kind of community that they're in. That growing food together creates a space where categories of difference that usually define us are pushed to the margins, where your income, age, gender, race, or other criteria that we use to stratify and classify ourselves fade almost to irrelevance. I mean, if you're rich, you can't make broccoli grow faster. Carrots don't taste better if you're white. The seed doesn't germinate more if you're a woman. And because food is a universal, everybody eats. This kind of project is radically inclusive. It's the kind of democratic participatory project that no one can be excluded from. And gardening also bypasses the hectic schedules that we usually set for ourselves, the school terms, the company meetings, the monthly bills, and rather connects us all to cycles that are bigger than ourselves, cycles of sun and rain and soil fertility and insects. And that's an important way to show what we have in common, and to slow our pace and push aside the conventional indicators of status and achievement, and allows us to connect more readily. And we connect within our community through these gardens, but also across communities. And if we may not have common language or lived experiences, we can share in common an understanding of an infestation of red spider mites or a well-grown turnip or the need for manure or whatever it might be. It gives us something to connect with that is irrespective of our resources and our social status. And that's a really powerful way of bringing people together. And we can bring something to share, seeds or other gifts that are respected. And also because there's food involved, there's special meaning to it. I mean, every culture ever known or studied has celebrated a higher meaning to the sharing of food. It's profound, but it's often unconscious. You know, you can harvest something and give it to a person. You can break bread together. We celebrate meals for special events. We even have sacred dining. We worship through food, our sacraments. So even though we don't always talk about it in these ways, it connects us when we share food together. And so while the food is essential, it's not actually the focus. The food is the means to the connections between people within a community and people across communities. And the challenge that we faced is that we're living and working in the most unequal country in the world. Whether you use the Gini coefficient or the Palmer ratio, South Africa is the worst. And so these disparities, these things that separate us are massive. And here's just an example of affluence and poverty living cheek to jowl separated by a fence. And this is not uncommon in Cape Town in South Africa. And compounding this, I mean, the reality is that 1 in 4 South Africans are food insecure. And the work that we're doing actually does little to directly address food security. There's not peer-reviewed data that shows that urban agriculture impacts food security in a meaningful way. But what it does show is that it can impact food insecurity indirectly, raising awareness, raising consciousness, activating a community of interested people together. And that's one of the real powers of these projects as well, is it brings people together to grow, and that agency can be used to address other issues that are specific to a particular community. So here's a group that we work with in Langa, and we're talking with them about some of the other issues that are priorities and how they can facilitate ways of addressing those, whether it's childcare, domestic abuse, job skills, safety, neglected public spaces, water, whatever it might be. There's an agency and a trust that's built that strengthens the community. And we've also realized that looking around the world at urban agriculture projects, that often urban agriculture is looked at as more like an urban lifestyle activity. It's helping people connect with nature, it's improving neighborhood aesthetics, raising consciousness about waste, environmental damage, done through mainstream food production. It builds green corridors for biodiversity, it cools the heat of the concrete jungle. We're relearning lost skills of cultivation, constructing a refuge from noise and pace of urban life. All these things are wonderful, but it overlooks some of the more fundamental needs of populations where we live. So urban food gardening can help address those things too, but the framing of urban agriculture is often leaving a gap. That means that this solidarity of interest and action is often broken across developed and developing societies. And we understand that community food gardens and urban agriculture can be effective, low-risk, practical ways to build a meaningful and sustained social cohesion within communities and between communities, regardless of the resources that they may have. And as we were able to understand this, we started to try and conceptualize it so we could communicate it. So here was an early diagram that was working it out and enabled us to engage with academics and activists and policymakers and so on. And it convinced us that we needed to really focus on this kind of work. How do we take this understanding and make it meaningful in a much broader range of communities where the urgent needs are much greater? And so part of that meant to get rid of our market, which we sold, and we still have a very close relationship and a licensing agreement with the brand and so on, but it's allowed us to focus on our core mission. And we started to work with existing urban agriculture projects to apply our insights in ways that would be relevant to them. So here's a therapeutic farm on the grounds of a psychiatric hospital, a school, a project that helps homeless people get back on their feet, another school, a Rastafarian community. And this kind of outreach enabled us to connect with people who then wanted to connect with us. And we were invited into the partnership between the city of Cape Town and the city of Aachen in Germany. And this was important to us, not only because we love to meet Germans and others, but also because it started to frame our work in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that was important because that's a common framing that allowed us to connect with many, many other people's works and interests and so on. And it also helped us understand that we had to articulate our focus even more clearly. And we went through a theory of change process that enabled us to distill our work as building community through gardening together. And the phrase is that we're addressing fragile urban communities. And we talk about the opposite of fragility is resilience. So building resilient communities through urban social agriculture. And in order to help take this forward, we knew that the uniqueness of each urban farming project had to be respected, and we couldn't just have models, templates, frameworks that you just apply willy-nilly wherever. So we looked for evidence-based design principles, and this work was supported by funding from the Global Risk Governance Program at the University of Cape Town. And we identified 6 common activities of urban social farms, and along with that, we were able to identify what the consequences of those activities are in terms of impacts. So there are 5 impacts we identified, but the link between the activities and the impacts was not direct one-to-one, and we need to unpack that further. So back we went to the analysis of our work, and were able over time to come up with a logical framework that links the activities here on the left and that through the outputs and the outcomes and the impacts, so that we can articulate what we're doing and how that generates the kind of impact that we're seeing. And that's really where we've got to, except that we have taken a stab at these principles. And so in these 5 categories at the bottom, which are the 5 areas of impact, each one has 3 different principles. And these tie back to what I was talking about previously about the power of urban food gardening. But they're phrased without jargon, or we try to keep the jargon out and in simple ways. But behind each of these is quite a lot of nuance that helps people understand what's really going on and how that can be relevant to their needs and their projects. And we also came up with a way of representing this on one slide. It's a somewhat elegant but complicated diagram. But on the outside are the principles, and then the next ring in are the activities, and then the outcomes, the numbers are the SDGs that are relevant. Further inside are the impacts, the 5 impacts, and then the core focus, which is building resilient communities through social urban agriculture. And this is where we are now. The next step for us is to get these principles and impacts to a point where they can scale, and we are working on the indicators and how we're going to be able to monitor and evaluate this linkage between the activities and the impacts. And we have indicators, but there are too many of them. They're too difficult to measure, and we're in the process of distilling and simplifying and coming up with a rigorous way of gathering the data to substantiate these claims. So that's a big part of what we're carrying on with, continuing with the networking focused on social farms, and now the acute urgency is addressing the COVID-19 pandemic. We also have one more thing planned for the year, which I'll leave you with. We're going to be doing another version of Food Dialogues a bit later, an entirely virtual event, and there's a description of it and taking stock of our food system in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, what it revealed and what the future might look like. And if you're interested, please just be in touch. And I thank you. I'm going to leave you with one final slide. If you're interested in further kind of academic work that's relevant to Cape Town and urban agriculture, here's some great sources. The top one is coming out later this year, and the others have come out as well. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much.